The wrench slipped from Jake Torres' grease-stained fingers and clattered against the deck plating of the Threxian cargo hauler. He swore under his breath, retrieved it, and returned his attention to the environmental control system spread out before him like the guts of some mechanical beast. Around him, his shop, if it could be called that, was a cramped chaos of spare parts, diagnostic equipment held together with improvised repairs, and tools that had seen better decades. Jake was 32 years old, though the last 7 years had added more gray to his temples than the previous 30 combined. He had left Earth with nothing but a duffel bag, a broken heart from a failed marriage, and the knowledge that staying would mean suffocating in the ruins of a business partnership gone sour. The galaxy had seemed big enough to get lost in, and Waystation Theta 7 had proven perfect for that purpose. The station orbited a dying red dwarf in the fringe territories, far from the gleaming core worlds where humanity was still trying to prove itself worthy of a seat at the galactic table. Here, nobody cared about credentials or where you came from. If you could fix their ship and charge less than the Mechanics Guild, you had customers. You talked to machines, Krell observed from the doorway. The Threxian trader was massive, nearly 7 feet tall with 4 arms and chitinous plates covering his torso. His compound eyes reflected the shop's flickering lights in kaleidoscope patterns. "My mate thinks it means you are simple-minded," Jake laughed, not looking up from his work. "Your mate might be right, but the machines talk back, so maybe we're all crazy together." He pressed his palm against the coolant regulator, feeling the vibration. Too fast, irregular. He closed his eyes and listened, not just with his ears, but with that sense mechanics develop after years of intimate relationship with machinery. There, a harmonic frequency that did not belong, a whisper of friction where there should be smooth operation. "The guild said 3 days, Krell continued. 3 days and 4,000 credits. The guild uses diagnostic computers that run through a decision tree of known problems," Jake replied, reaching for a smaller wrench. "When they hit something outside the tree, they start replacing parts until something works, expensive and slow. And you?" "I listen." 20 minutes later, the environmental system hummed with perfect mechanical harmony. Jake had replaced a single coupling that had worn down at an unexpected angle, causing a cascade of compensatory failures throughout the system. The guild's diagnostic would never have caught it, not in 3 days, maybe not ever. Krell transferred the credits with obvious relief. "You should be careful, Jake Torres. The guild does not appreciate competition. There are rumors. Independent mechanics having accidents. Equipment failures. Legal troubles appearing from nowhere." Jake wiped his hands on a rag already stiff with accumulated grime. "I'm small-time, Krell, not worth their attention." But even as he said it, Jake felt the familiar twist in his gut that told him he was lying to himself. He had been feeling eyes on him lately, sensing the attention that came when you disrupted an equilibrium that powerful people wanted maintained. The Mechanics Guild had held a monopoly on spacecraft repair for over 3,000 years. They did not tolerate threats. Still, what was he supposed to do? Stop helping people who needed it? Go crawling to the guild, pay their extortionate certification fees, submit to their rigid protocols? He had not come to the edge of known space just to put himself in another cage. As Krell departed, Jake began closing up the shop. The station's diurnal cycle was winding down, the lights dimming to simulate nighttime for the convenience of species who still kept such rhythms. He was thinking about the bottle of actual Earth whiskey he had been saving, wondering if tonight was the night to open it, when the desperate knocking came at his door. The Carly merchant who stood in the threshold was the picture of barely contained panic. His species was tall and willowy, with elongated fingers and large, luminous eyes that betrayed every emotion. Right now, those eyes showed pure desperation. "Jake Torres?" the Carly asked, his voice carrying the musical quality his species was known for. "I am Velen, merchant captain of the Stellar Compass. I need help. I have been told you sometimes achieve the impossible." Jake studied the alien. The Carly were one of the galaxy's older spacefaring species, proud of their technological sophistication. They had been building quantum drives while humans were still banging rocks together. For one of them to come to a human mechanic meant true desperation. "Come in," Jake said. Tell me what's wrong. Velen's story spilled out in a torrent. His ship's quantum drive had developed cascading corruption errors 3 days ago. He had taken it to the best guild shops on the station, 3 of them. All had given the same diagnosis: complete quantum core replacement. 800,000 credits. 6 weeks for the parts to arrive from a core world. I'm a small merchant, Velen said, his voice cracking with strain. I have a contract deadline in 4 days. If I miss it, the penalties will bankrupt me. Everything I have built, everything my family depends on, gone. Jake felt the weight of that desperation. He knew what it was like to watch everything crumble, to feel the walls closing in with no escape visible. I've never worked on a Carly quantum system before, he admitted. Your technology is way beyond what I usually handle. I know, Velen said, but the alternative is doing nothing and losing everything anyway. Please, at least look at it. Jake grabbed his toolkit. Show me your ship. The stellar compass was a beautiful vessel, sleek and elegant in the way only Carly engineering could achieve. The quantum drive occupied the heart of the ship, a crystalline structure that seemed to fold space around itself even when dormant. Error codes scrolled across holographic displays in scripts Jake could barely read. Velen explained what the guild diagnostics had shown, using technical terminology that Jake understood maybe half of. Quantum entanglement cascades, coherence-decoherence ratios, phase-lock deterioration matrices. It was impressive and almost completely useless to Jake's actual process. He set down his toolkit and just looked, watched, listened. The error patterns had a rhythm. They cascaded in waves, each one triggering compensatory responses in other systems, which then triggered their own errors. It reminded Jake of something, though he could not quite place what. When did this start? He asked. Velen checked his logs. 14 days ago, shortly after we left the Kepler Nebula. What were you hauling through the nebula? Rare minerals, thurium crystals mostly. Why does that? Did your cargo bay shields flicker at all during transit? Velen's eyes widened. Yes. For perhaps 30 seconds. How did you? Jake was already moving, his mind putting pieces together in ways that had nothing to do with guild training and everything to do with pattern recognition earned through years of fixing broken things with limited resources. The Kepler Nebula was full of exotic particles. If the cargo bay shields had failed, even briefly, those particles could have interfaced with the quantum drive's navigation matrices. The drive was not broken. It was confused. He started working, and what he did would have given a guild master a heart attack. Jake manually shut down subsystems in a sequence no manual recommended, creating intentional instabilities that should have crashed the entire system. He rerouted a magnetic pulse generator from the shield emitters, using it to deliver precise electromagnetic shocks to the quantum core. He accessed the navigation protocol with his battered datapad and rewrote a section of code, translating quantum logic into something closer to human Boolean operations. Velen watched in growing horror and fascination. That should not work, he whispered. None of what you are doing should be possible. Probably not, Jake agreed, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked. But your drive doesn't know that. 18 minutes after he started, the stellar compass shuddered. The crystalline quantum core flared with light, then settled into a steady, harmonious glow. Every error code vanished. The efficiency readings were not just back to normal, they were 40% better than before the corruption. Velen stared at his instruments in disbelief. I do not understand. 3 guild masters said this was impossible without a complete replacement. You fixed it in less time than it takes me to run a pre-flight check. Jake packed up his tools, exhausted but satisfied. The guild was looking for mechanical failure. This was a logic problem. Your drive was stuck in a loop, trying to recalibrate against corrupted baseline data. I just gave it a way to reset and reestablish a clean baseline. But how did you know? Jake shrugged. Reminded me of a time back on Earth when my truck's computer got scrambled by a solar flare. Same principle, different scale. Velen transferred payment immediately, but Jake could see the wheels turning behind those luminous eyes. The Carly was already wondering who else needed to hear about this human mechanic who could do the impossible. Jake should have asked him to keep quiet, should have downplayed what he had done. But he was tired, and it felt good to help someone, and he did not yet understand what he had set in motion. Word spread like fire in an oxygen-rich atmosphere. Within 24 hours, Jake's shop had a line of customers stretching down the corridor. Species he had never even seen before brought him problems the guild had deemed unsolvable or not cost-effective to repair. A Selthari navigator with a scrambled star chart computer. A Vornathi refugee whose ship's AI had locked everyone out after trauma-induced fragmentation. A Threxian hauler captain whose guild-certified repair had somehow made things worse. Jake worked until his hands ached and his eyes burned, but he took every case. Some he could fix, some he could not. But he approached each one the same way. Observe, listen, think laterally, improvise. News traveled through the fringe territories in strange ways. Trader gossip, station news feeds, the quantum equivalent of word of mouth. Jake Torres became a name people mentioned. The human mechanic who did not play by guild rules and somehow got results anyway. And in guild offices across a dozen stations and worlds, alerts began to flag. Investigation requests were filed. Resources were allocated. A problem had emerged. It needed to be solved. Thane arrived on way station Theta 7 on a commercial transport, carrying credentials that opened every door and made every official nervous. He was Corvaxian, a species known for rigid adherence to rules and regulations. They made excellent bureaucrats, investigators, and enforcers of established order. Thane had been with the guild for 40 years, working his way up from apprentice to master investigator. He had shut down hundreds of unlicensed operations, protected guild interests across dozens of worlds, and never once questioned whether what he did was right. Rules existed for reasons. The guild maintained standards. Without standards, there was chaos. He watched Jake Torres work from across the shop floor, standing in the shadows where the human would not notice. Jake was repairing a Selthari navigation computer, and what Thane saw both impressed and disturbed him. The human had no formal training in Selthari systems. Thane had checked his records thoroughly. He should not even be able to interface with the computer properly. Yet there he was, manipulating holographic interfaces with casual familiarity, talking to the machine like it was a person. "Come on, sweetheart," Jake murmured. "I know it hurts. I know the crash scrambled your matrices, but you remember how it's supposed to work. It's in there. Let's find it together." The navigation computer should not have responded to that approach. It was a machine, governed by logical protocols. But Thane watched as error codes resolved themselves, as corrupted star charts reconstructed themselves, as the system came back online with a stability that should have required complete reprogramming. It was not just unorthodox. It was impossible, yet it happened right in front of Thane's eyes. He filed his initial report that evening, expecting praise for identifying a clear violation of guild standards. Instead, the response from headquarters made him deeply uncomfortable. The council did not want Jake Torres certified. They wanted him contained. Thane read the directive 3 times, each reading leaving him more unsettled. Jake was not breaking any laws, not technically. Humans were so new to galactic society that the licensing requirements were ambiguous at best. But his methods threatened something the guild valued more than rules: their monopoly on expertise. If independent mechanics started believing they could solve problems through intuition and improvisation rather than guild training, the entire system the guild had built over millennia would be undermined. Knowledge was power, and the guild's power rested on the belief that only they possessed the knowledge necessary to keep the galaxy's ships flying. Thane was ordered to recruit Jake. Bring him into the guild where his techniques could be studied, standardized, and ultimately controlled. He approached Jake the next day with an offer any mechanic would dream of: full guild certification, bypassing the usual decade of training and enormous fees, access to the best facilities in the galaxy, guaranteed income, benefits, connections. All Jake had to do was stop working independently and submit to guild oversight. Jake listened to the entire pitch while working on a cooling system. When Thane finished, the human did not even look up. "No thanks," Jake said. Thane blinked, certain he had misheard. "You do not understand. This is an extraordinary opportunity. The guild never makes offers like this." "I understand perfectly." Jake straightened, wiping his hands. "You want to control what I do, how I work, who I help. I didn't come all the way out here to put myself back in a cage. This is not a cage, this is legitimacy, protection. Without guild backing, you are vulnerable. To what? Thane chose his next words carefully. The guild protects its interests. Torres, independent mechanics who become too successful sometimes face difficulties. Supply chain problems, regulatory scrutiny, accidents. Jake's eyes hardened. Is that a threat? It is a warning from someone who does not wish to see you hurt. And Thane realized to his surprise that he meant it. There was something about this human stubborn integrity that he respected, even as it made his job harder. Thanks for the warning, Jake said, but I'll take my chances. Thane left the shop with a sinking feeling. He had done his job, made the offer. Now events would take their course, and he suspected Jake Torres had no idea what forces he had set himself against. The pressure started subtly. Parts suppliers who had always been reliable suddenly claimed shortages when Jake placed orders. Customers received anonymous messages warning that using non-guild mechanics voided their insurance and warranties. Station inspectors appeared at Jake's shop with increasing frequency, citing obscure code violations that required expensive corrections. Jake recognized it for what it was, a coordinated campaign to drive him out of business. The guild was leveraging every relationship, every regulation, every pressure point they had developed over 3,000 years of institutional power. Some customers stopped coming, unable to risk guild retaliation. Others came only at night, paying in untraceable credits, afraid to be associated with the human mechanic who had made himself a guild enemy. Jake's income dropped by 70% in a month. He burned through his savings keeping the shop open, helping refugees and down-on-their-luck traders who could not afford guild prices. Krell and Velen tried to help, directing customers his way, but they had their own livelihoods to protect. Jake lay awake at night on the cot in the back of his shop, staring at the ceiling and wondering if stubborn pride was worth this. He could leave, start over on another station, keep his head down. Maybe the guild would leave him alone if he stopped being a problem. But that thought died every time someone like Velen walked through his door. Every time he saw the relief on someone's face when he fixed something the guild said was unfixable. Every time he remembered why he had started doing this in the first place. He had run from Earth to escape feeling powerless. He would not run again. Then came the incident that nearly destroyed everything. A small transport ship Jake had repaired 2 weeks earlier suffered a catastrophic failure during takeoff. The ship crashed back onto the landing pad, tearing through support structures and narrowly missing a fuel depot. The pilot survived with serious injuries. 3 dock workers were hurt in the crash. Station security arrested Jake within the hour. The evidence was damning. The failure originated in the propulsion system, specifically in components Jake had recently serviced. Diagnostic analysis showed improper repair work, shortcuts taken, safety protocols ignored. The kind of negligent maintenance that gave independent mechanics a bad reputation. Sitting in the detention cell, Jake felt the walls closing in with suffocating familiarity. This was it, the end of everything he had built. He would be banned from practicing mechanics anywhere in concordant space, fined amounts he could never pay. His name would become a cautionary tale. The worst part was the doubt. Had he made a mistake? Had his confidence in his unorthodox methods led to someone getting hurt? He replayed the repair in his mind, checking every step, every decision. His work had been solid. He was certain of it, but certainty meant nothing against hard evidence. Thane studied the crash analysis with growing suspicion. Something was wrong. The failure pattern was too perfect, too precisely calibrated to implicate Jake without killing anyone. A real mechanical failure would have been messier, more random. He had spent 40 years investigating mechanics. He knew what negligent work looked like, and this was not it. Against his better judgment, against his guild training that said to trust the evidence and close the case, Thane started digging deeper. He pulled maintenance records, cross-referenced parts suppliers, tracked down the ship's previous service history. He interviewed the pilot when she was coherent enough to answer questions, asking about the exact sequence of events leading to the failure. And slowly, piece by piece, he uncovered the truth. The components that failed had been replaced after Jake's service. Someone with access to the ship had swapped out the parts Jake installed with inferior ones, then carefully doctored the maintenance logs to hide the swap. The sabotage was sophisticated, designed by someone who understood both starship systems and how to frame a mechanic. Thane traced the parts back to a guild-certified shop. The shop's owner was a Carly master named Cordex, a traditionalist who had been vocal about the threat independent mechanics posed to proper standards. The same Cordex who had publicly called Jake Torres an insult to the profession. Thane sat in his quarters for a long time, staring at the evidence he had compiled. He had a choice. He could bury this information, let events proceed as planned. Jake would be convicted, the problem eliminated, the guild's monopoly protected. It would be the easy choice, the loyal choice. Or he could expose a guild master's criminal actions, knowing it would make him a pariah within the organization he had served his entire life. Rules existed for reasons. Standards mattered. But what did any of it mean if the guild itself broke those rules to maintain power? Thane presented his evidence to station security the next morning. Jake was released within hours. Cordex was expelled from the guild, though Thane noticed bitterly that he was quietly reassigned to another sector rather than prosecuted. The guild protected its own, even when they were criminals. Jake emerged from detention to find his shop vandalized, his customer base nearly gone, his reputation in tatters. Station gossip had already convicted him. The truth would take time to spread if it ever did. Velen found him sitting in the ruins of his shop, staring at broken equipment with empty eyes. "You should leave," the Carly merchant said gently. "Start over somewhere else." "I've been thinking about that," Jake admitted. "But you will not." "No, I don't think I will." Velen's luminous eyes reflected concern and something else, calculation. "Then you need to change the game. The guild's power comes from monopoly and secrecy. Their techniques are proprietary, their training exclusive. What if you did the opposite?" Jake looked up. "What do you mean?" "Share what you know, teach others, make your methods freely available. If independent mechanics across the galaxy start using human techniques, the guild cannot stop all of you." It was crazy. Jake was not a teacher. He barely understood his own process well enough to articulate it. How could he explain intuition, the ability to listen to machines, the pattern recognition that came from experience rather than manuals? But as Velen outlined the idea, workshops, freely shared documentation, a network of mechanics supporting each other, Jake felt something stir. Hope, maybe. Or just the stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. "Let me make some calls," Velen said. "I know people who need what you can teach." The first workshop was held in Jake's shop, with 12 mechanics from various species crowded into a space meant for maybe 6. They were the overlooked, the struggling, the ones the guild had rejected or ignored. A Threxian who could not afford certification fees. A Selthari whose species was considered too primitive for proper training. A young Carly who had failed the guild entrance exams 3 times. Jake stood before them, feeling profoundly unqualified, and told them the truth. "I can't teach you guild techniques," he said. "I don't know them. What I can share is how I approach problems. It's not going to work for everyone, but maybe it'll help some of you." He showed them his process, how he observed before acting, how he listened to the sounds and rhythms of machinery, how he thought about ships not as collections of parts but as integrated systems that communicated their problems if you paid attention. How sometimes the solution was in the manual and sometimes it was in trusting your instincts. But more than techniques, he taught them a philosophy, that the guild did not own knowledge, that improvisation was not inferior to protocol, that creativity mattered as much as training. A Threxian mechanic raised one of his 4 hands. "The guild says this kind of thinking is dangerous, that without strict standards, we risk catastrophic failures." "The guild also said Velen's quantum drive needed complete replacement," Jake replied. "Sometimes the manual is wrong. Sometimes the impossible is just something nobody's tried yet." The workshop ran 6 hours. Jake expected maybe half the mechanics to find it useful. Instead, all 12 stayed until the end, asking questions, sharing their own experiences, building on his ideas. Word spread again, but differently this time. Not just about Jake, but about what he was teaching. About a different way of thinking about mechanics. More workshops followed. Mechanics started applying Jake's techniques, getting results. They began helping each other, sharing solutions, building a network that operated outside guild control. Independent repair shops began thriving again, not by undercutting the guild on price, but by offering something the guild could not: creative problem-solving and genuine care for the customer. The guild noticed, of course. They sent representatives to attend workshops undercover, trying to understand and counter these methods. But they could not replicate what Jake taught because it was not a technique. It was a mindset, a philosophy, a way of seeing problems that came from human history, from species that had survived by adapting, improvising, refusing to accept that any problem was truly impossible. Within the guild itself, fractures appeared. Younger members, inspired by what they heard about human methods, began questioning the old ways. Why did training take 10 years when most of it was memorizing procedures? Why were proprietary techniques kept secret instead of shared? Why did the guild treat knowledge as property instead of a tool to help people? Thane found himself at the center of those questions. His investigation of the sabotage had marked him as unreliable to the old guard, but as a hero to reformers. He had not set out to start a revolution. He had just wanted to follow the rules properly. But now he was leading a faction arguing that the guild needed to adapt or die. "You have caused quite the disruption," Thane told Jake over drinks at a station bar 6 months after the workshops began. "I just wanted to fix ships," Jake said. "You fixed more than ships. You fixed the idea that only the guild's way was valid. You showed the galaxy that humans bring something valuable, not just to engineering, but to how we think about problems. The old guard won't give up." "No," Thane agreed. "They are already looking for ways to discredit you. Legal challenges, regulatory changes. They have 3,000 years of institutional power. They will not surrender easily." Jake smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "Let them try. I'm not going anywhere." 3 weeks later, an official message arrived from the Galactic Mechanics Consortium, an independent organization that accredited engineering programs across dozens of worlds. They offered Jake a position as visiting lecturer, teaching his approach to students on 6 different planets. It was not guild certification, but it was something better: recognition that his methods had legitimate value. Velen's merchant network had grown into a cooperative, offering fair-price repairs using techniques Jake had taught. Waystation Theta 7 had become known as a hub for independent mechanics, a place where innovation mattered more than credentials. Jake stood in his expanded shop, now staffed by 3 apprentices learning his methods, and watched a young Carly mechanic work on a quantum drive. She was talking to it, just like Jake had taught her, treating the machine like a partner rather than a problem. The door chimed. Thane entered, looking troubled. "The old guard is making moves," the Corvaxian said. "They are proposing new regulations that would effectively ban your teaching methods, calling them unsafe, unproven. They have political allies. It could get messy." Jake nodded slowly. He had expected this. The guild would not surrender their monopoly without a fight. There would be legal battles, regulatory challenges, political maneuvering. It would take years to resolve, maybe decades. "Will you fight them?" Thane asked. Jake looked around his shop, at the apprentices learning a different way, at the ships waiting for repairs, at the message board covered with thank you notes from customers the guild would have turned away. He thought about Velen and Krell and all the others who had taken a chance on a human mechanic with unorthodox methods. "Yeah," he said. "I'll fight. Not because I want to destroy the guild or because I think I have all the answers, but because people deserve a choice. Because knowledge shouldn't be locked away behind walls. Because sometimes the impossible is just something nobody's tried yet." Thane allowed himself a rare smile. "Very well. Then I will fight beside you." As the Corvaxian left, another customer arrived. A species Jake had never seen before, with a ship problem that sounded completely impossible. Something about dimensional phase shifts and quantum entanglement cascades that made even Velen's quantum drive issue look simple. Jake grabbed his battered toolkit and followed the alien toward the landing bays. Behind him, his apprentices were already taking bets on how long it would take him to solve it. He had no idea if he could fix this ship, but he would try. He would observe, listen, think laterally, and refused to accept that any problem was truly beyond solving. That was the human way. That was what he had learned in 7 years of running from his past, and then finally standing still long enough to build something worth fighting for. The galaxy was vast, filled with species older and more technologically advanced than humanity. But humans brought something to the table that 3,000 years of guild monopoly had forgotten: the stubborn belief that there was always another way, that creativity mattered as much as knowledge, that the impossible was just an invitation to try harder. Jake Torres was just one mechanic on one small station in the fringe territories, but he had shown the galaxy something important. And now, whether the guild liked it or not, that idea was spreading. Every machine had a story. You just needed to listen.